turn your cameras on. Please feel free to turn your cameras on. I see lots of familiar faces, which is fantastic. Some new names as well too, so welcome to the conversation. Great to see everybody. And I think in the interest of time, I'm going to kick things off now. So welcome again, everybody, to the Patient Engagement Open and Forum session. My name is Haley Chapman. I am a program director with Patient Focused Medicines Development, PFMD, and really glad to be part of this conversation with all of you today. This is a really exciting session, given that not only is it the last Patient Engagement Open Forum virtual session of 2024, but a really great topic around looking at the value of patient engagement. So today we're going to hear a number of different patient engagement champions and about their efforts to really help advance patient engagement intelligence by demonstrating the value of patient engagement. So let's dive into this journey together and look towards the impact and inspiration that you'll gain from all of the speakers today. So if we can move to the next slide, just very quickly letting people know as well that all of our virtual sessions are now accessible in over 50 languages with instant translation available. So you can choose that during the session if you would like. You can click on the open button and the pop-up that will appear in the right corner of your screen and choose the preferred language. And the automatic translations will begin on the right side of your Zoom. And you can switch between the chat and the AI translation tool. You can click on chat and apps, the icons on the bar below your Zoom screen. If there's any technical difficulties, please don't hesitate to send a message in the chat, and one of our team can certainly give you a hand with that as well too. On to the next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we have a number of terrific speakers and panelists with us today. We have Liz Clark from King's College London, Kristen Schneeman from the Faster Cures, Mark Booten as a PFMD board member, and Faye Weston, a key representative in terms of a lot of the work that we do representing the patient community as well. And to kick things off, we thought we'd have a little bit of fun. Just if we can move to the next slide, you'll see here, and this is for the audience as well too. Could you consider, as you're thinking about the value of patient engagement, and when you think about describing it, which picture best represents how you feel? So I encourage all of our audience members to see how that they would like to be able to put the specific number in the chat. You're welcome to put where you're from as well too, but let us know how you're feeling about the value of patient engagement and how you would describe it. Mark is a speaker. I see you've put number 4, and may I ask a quick explanation of that too?
It's all about the lips. Take a look at the lips on number 4, and it says it all, just how I feel.
All right, terrific. Thanks, Mark. Faye, how about you?
Oh, well, I'd definitely go number 3, because to me it's really aspirational, because it's obviously a sunny day and I'd really like to see the whole field of patient engagement shine and bring a light on so many areas. And the goat also looks really quite quizzical and interested, because it is an interesting subject. So number 3 is definitely my goat.
All right, sounds great, Faye. Thank you. Kristen, how about you?
That was such a well thought through answer. I gravitated to number 9 because it looks like it's making a lot of noise. So that's sort of how I feel about
All right, fabulous.
About the value of patient engagement.
That's great. I love it. And Liz, how about you?
I went for number 8 because there is just so much out there to read and review and consider that I at times just feel totally exhausted by it all. And then I pick myself up and think, right, okay, next steps. So
Okay, I love these explanations, and I see we're getting lots of answers in the chat as well too, which is terrific. Feel free to add any type of explanation you like as well. I'll quickly share mine, and I have to say, Faye, I went with yours as well, number 3, because for me, the future is very bright. And so looking forward to this discussion and certainly how we can continue to engage and think about the value of patient engagement too. So thanks everybody for playing along. Let's move on to the next slide and think a bit more carefully about specifically what we're going to do in this session today. And we have 3 goals in mind, and this sort of helps to explain as well what we hope to accomplish, what we hope that we will pass on, and certainly how our audience can contribute as well. So we'll certainly take a look as we talk about patient engagement and think about a framework as we think about different values and hear more about that. We'll learn about the value of patient engagement in medtech, in sustainability strategies, and beyond that as well too. We'll hear lots of different perspectives of when we're thinking about the value of patient engagement. Once we've heard from our speakers, then we'll also think about and be able to share more information about how companies are integrating patient engagement into sustainability strategies. If that's a new term for you in terms of sustainability strategies or ESG, don't worry, you're not alone. We will take some time to explain that as well. And so building on that in terms of how companies are integrating patient engagement into these strategies, we'll also think about how we can consider different metrics as well for that too. And then finally, certainly last but definitely not least, we look to all of you for active contributions to building the case for patient engagement. We want to hear from you, and we will have some breakouts. And this is your opportunity to share your perspectives, to share your experience in what you deem important about patient engagement and the value that it brings to different contexts and certainly to different stakeholders as well. On the next slide, you'll see then building on that, certainly the outline for the day or for the session's agenda. As I mentioned, we'll hear from the speakers. We'll share some more information about the metrics that I referenced just a few moments ago and the analysis. We'll take some time for a Q&A, and then we'll do some breakout groups to gather your insights, report back, and describe in terms of what's next and where we go from here. So with that in mind, I'd like to kick things off a little bit to share a little bit more about what we talk about with patient engagement intelligence. You will have seen that in the title from our session today. And this is really thinking about how do we think about patient engagement, moving beyond just it being the right thing to do, but how do we really consider the value and the importance of patient engagement by different stakeholders, whether that be from the business community, from regulators, from HTAs, and how do we take all of the various different insights that we gather and really help to better articulate the value of patient engagement. So it really starts with collecting information and data from various different sources, as you'll see on the screen there, whether that comes from surveys, focus groups, advisory boards. And then how do we take that data and really help to process, to organize it into information, to better provide the context and answers maybe to specific questions? And then finally, how do we take that information, analyze it to generate intelligence, to offer better insights and really help guide strategic decision-making? So the idea is, how can we use the data to better articulate the value of patient engagement and also to think about ways that we can improve patient engagement activities and initiatives as well. On the next slide, you'll see in terms of thinking about how do we utilize patient engagement intelligence, there's a number of different activities that we can, they provides information for. One certainly is to answer questions. How can this data help to address any number of different questions? The data can also be used to show results. So thinking about how does patient engagement address and help to increase new product launches? How does it help to provide information in any number of different ways? How can it help to justify either a budget or the existence within different organizations as well? So again, thinking about this data and how can it be utilized to help inform and help to justify the budget. It can also help to identify different areas of improvement or where we need to share feedback. And ultimately, what we're looking at today is to think about how can we demonstrate the value of patient engagement. And that's really where we're focusing our efforts on today. On the next slide, you'll see this certainly helps to build on the work that we've been doing within PFMD around the Patient Engagement Intelligence Initiative. And you'll see from the top of the screen there, it's very much about driving improvements and materializing the value of patient engagement for society, patients, and organizations through the use of data. And underneath that, you'll see that we have a number of ambitions and different activities that we're focusing on. One is thinking about how do we materialize the value of patient engagement and thinking specifically about the use of a metric selector and identifying metrics. In the second area, you'll see there that it's thinking about evidence-based learning, how we can identify how and when patient engagement is most impactful. We have a number of different initiatives underway there, specifically one in the area of feedback loops. And then finally, in the third area is building the strong foundation of evidence, specifically when we're thinking about different stakeholder groups. And we've spent a lot of time looking at it from the investor, sustainability, and impact perspective. And all three of those help to demonstrate the value of patient engagement. Specifically in the last area, when we're talking about investors and certainly thinking about the business case, on the next slide, some of you may have seen this graphic before, but certainly it's something that helps us to better articulate the value of patient engagement from a business sense and really thinking about how from the various different resources in terms of time and money, how patient engagement can provide that value. This is just one way of looking at the value of patient engagement from a business sense. And I'd like to introduce now Liz Clark, who's going to share a little bit more information about some of the great research and the great thinking that's going on around the different frameworks or the different ways to be thinking about the value of patient engagement. So Liz, I look forward to turning it over to you.
Thank you, Hayley. So I started thinking about value some years ago, not so much in the context of patient engagement, but wearing my trainer hat. And doing that, I was asking the students that I was training or teaching to identify elements of value about a product to make a value proposition. So if we can go on to the next slide. What I found when I was doing that was that, a bit like the slide you just shown, actually, people were really thinking about value in terms of cost and in terms of financial benefit, and then also in terms of time. So people were getting kind of stuck in that rut, and they found it very hard to label more qualitative values. And I was asked if I could come up with a structure for some sort of systematic consideration of different value types. So I did what wise people do in this situation and looked to see if anybody else had developed one, and indeed they had. So on the next slide, you can see an example of a way of conceptualizing value. And this is a value pyramid or a value triangle. And they were created by a management consultancy, a large US management consultancy, Bain & Company. And they had developed two versions, a business to consumer one, which was asking about what do consumers value, and a business to business one, which was asking what do businesses value. And the idea with these is that at the bottom of the base, you have more concrete functional values, such as costs, time, etc. But as you move up the pyramid, they become more personal, more emotional, and perhaps harder to quantify. So the hierarchy doesn't actually imply importance. So one at the bottom of the pyramid is no less important than one at the top of the pyramid. But it's simply a way of organizing and thinking about values. And so these were initially created to think about product and service design and how to explain the value of those products in value propositions. So I moved on, got more involved in patient engagement stuff. And when we were talking about value in patient engagement, I thought, well, actually, could we conceptualize value in patient engagement in a similar way? And this is what led us at King's to think about developing some value triangles for patient engagement. So on that, I would like to ask Fatima, who's one of our PhD students, to describe where we've got with those value triangles to date. So if we move to the next slide, and Fatima, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Liz. Hi, everyone. So what we did was in May, the Center for Pharmaceutical Medicines Research organized a patient engagement related workshop. And prior to the workshop, we created a poll where we asked people to describe some of these elements of value and to describe what value meant to them. So after we got what the people, all the inputs, we tried to use the Bain's and Company's value triangle to also classify some of this value into the patient perspective. So we divided them into functional, emotional, life-changing, and social impact at different levels. And then we have seen cases where some of the elements of values in one of the components appear in multiple levels. So during the workshop, we also we printed these values and add sticky notes and asked participants to also like look at it and see if there are other places they need to put other values, to think about other values, and to place them in this hierarchy or in these various levels. So we got this for patient, and what I find really interesting is for the functional value, for instance, reducing study trial burden. I've seen various examples where like patient engagement has had positive impact in reducing clinical trial burden, thus leading to like, it is as though one of the elements of value will move all the way up to cause benefits at different levels, including to the researchers, to the pharmaceutical industry. So reducing the study burden appears in different levels, and it leads to like better treatment, easier access for the pharma, shorten the time and costs, increases accelerated development, increases the chances of approval. So they all interlink to one another at different level, where one value at the bottom may lead to like impacts at other levels beyond what is in the triangle. So this is what some of the insights we got for the elements of value in the lens of patients, carers, patient organizations, and other patient representatives. And the next slide, please, is the sort of elements we got from the researcher perspective, which could be academic researchers, clinical researchers, pharma, and every other researcher. So if we look at this value as well, the triangle has some of the components like related to the patient triangle, meaning wherever there's impact to patient, there may be like translatable impact to the researchers. And at the end, I think there's all like sort of benefits, not maybe financial, but like more importantly, benefit that could like improve the health outcomes of patient, which is the most important, I think, value. Yes.
On mute. Thank you, Fatima. That was a really good description of the work that we've done on these so far. And I think really important that those values at the top of the triangle, the motivation and the energy from a researcher perspective, as you said, whether that is pharma researcher, whether it's an academic researcher, might be difficult to quantify, but has a very real impact. So in conclusion from this work, if we go on to the next slide, the triangles are intended to support the process of thinking about, evaluating, and articulating value in patient engagement. And they're conceptual frameworks. So they're not a process or a tool where you put something in at one end and get something out the other end, but they're a way of organizing and externalizing thinking. And that is the aim of their use. And the two triangles that we've shared are the ones that we have started developing. You could argue that actually we could split the researcher one into academic and pharma if the contexts are sufficiently different. We can also extend that to create some additional triangles for investors and societal impact, which is what we'll be doing later today. So following refinement of these as resources, and I very much hope that in time they might become as useful to the patient engagement community as the Bain triangles were to me when I was trying to train that group of people those years ago, simply as a way of conceptualizing, thinking about and expressing value in the work that we do to support patient engagement in research and all other activities that we do in medicines development and life cycle work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Liz and Fatima. I think it's an excellent example of how you're trying to help us add some clarity and some structure to when we're thinking about the value of patient engagement. I can see there's a lot of comments in the chat as well too. A couple of things I just want to pick up on from the chat, and certainly I hope we'll have time for a Q&A after all of the speakers have finished as well. But a couple of just some quick points. There was a question about what is ESG? And so certainly I believe there's a response given, but we will be getting into that into a little bit more detail. The second piece as well, that as you alluded to in this final slide, Liz, that while you have focused to date on researchers and patients, as part of this session today, we will be looking to explore further in terms of investors and also the society impacts as well too. So looking to build on the work that you have done, in case there may have been something that was missed in terms of the patients and researchers, but also then looking to see how we might formulate some different triangles as well. And certainly I think there was a number of comments as well too about some interesting resources, or have we heard about certain ways to define different aspects of the work? If anybody in the audience has additional information that they would like to share with us, of course, this is a collaborative effort. So we very much welcome you to share those resources to help build on this work. And we'll talk at the end of the session about how you might like to be further engaged with this effort as well. But for now, I'd like to turn things over to Kristen. And Kristen, you're going to share a little bit of a different perspective in terms of the value of patient engagement within medtech. We often hear about patient engagement and the value behind that within the pharmaceutical sector. But I'm really keen to hear what you have to say and to share about the report and the work that you've done around medtech. So I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, wonderful. Thanks so much. And thanks to Liz and Fatima for a very interesting presentation to kick us off. For those of you I don't know, I'm Kristen Schneeman. I'm a senior director on the Faster Cures team, excuse me, at the Milken Institute. If you can go to the next slide, we have over many years engaged very deeply with the community of patient-driven organizations that support R&D for a number of reasons. We just appreciate the incredible role that they play in this ecosystem. And we have also tried to consistently contribute in a variety of ways to advancing the sort of science and practice of patient engagement in biomedical R&D. And most recently, like others represented here, including PFMD and others, we've been exploring the application of that discipline and approach in the context of medtech product development, where there's a lot of groundbreaking innovation taking place, but it seems that the application of patient engagement practices lags behind the biopharmaceutical industry. So we're interested in trying to understand why that's true and what we can do about it. And as Haley mentioned, we have a new report out, which you see here on the left, and I think maybe there will be a link in the chat at some point. If not, I can put it there. And I'm going to kind of skate through at a very high level, just some of our key findings that might be informative to this conversation. As noted, we feel that MedTech's adoption of patient engagement has maybe lagged behind biopharma for the reasons that you see here. There is a significant heterogeneity of products under that heading of MedTech. It encompasses medical devices, diagnostics, digital health products. Even within those categories, there are some that are patient-facing and many that are not patient-facing. And there are a lot of elements that can complicate sort of the thinking and approach to maybe engaging patients and patient communities. They have different authorization requirements and regulatory pathways from drugs. And again, a heterogeneity of different pathways and requirements. They generally have shorter development timelines and differences in early R&D pathways. And by the way, I will probably make some very gross generalizations about the med tech industry here, so forgive me for those. And that they are sometimes challenged in identifying appropriate patient community partners in ways that maybe biopharmaceutical companies are less challenged. So if you can go to the next slide, I'm just going to talk at a very high level about some of the challenges and value of patient engagement in med tech. And on the challenges side, I really am just going to highlight, a lot of these will look familiar. They're the same for patient engagement in drug development, but I'll just highlight some ways in which maybe med tech is challenged in different ways. Excuse me. First of all, resource constraints and poorly understood return on investment. Med tech companies, as I said, tend to have shorter development timelines and less available capital, which makes justification of the value of patient engagement maybe even more important than in the drug development industry. Second, compliance concerns. Med tech companies may have some unique issues in this regard as well, especially those that are directly patient-facing or involve direct data collection from patients. Third is lack of regulatory and reimbursement clarity, something I think we all hear about a lot. But on MedTech, there are different approaches among, for instance, the various centers at FDA in the US context. And there have been a lot of calls for more consistent recommendations across regulatory bodies. Fourth, reaching appropriate patient populations. As I mentioned, MedTech companies can be especially challenged as there is sometimes not really a ready-made patient community or foundation organized around the technologies they're developing. They can tend to kind of cross different conditions, or devices, diagnostics, and digital health are not always the top things on the minds of the patient communities to support and be engaged with. The next is engaging early. MedTech developers have some special challenges in this regard, as they may be ironically more accustomed to thinking about engaging end users, and they use that term a lot, specifically to test their products relatively late in the development cycle. And just to the point of that continuum we saw earlier, which is, I love that slide where it kind of indicates the value at the different places in the development continuum of patient engagement. That continuum doesn't even look that way in a lot of med tech development. It's much more circular. So they even think about their product development cycles in different ways. And then finally, adoption of tools and frameworks. We know there are a lot out there, and I think Liz's contributions are going to be really, really useful to roll a lot of that up, but a lot of those are not specific to the context of the med tech industry, though some of them have been adapted, including by PFMD. On the value side, I'll be even more brief. I think a lot of these, there are, of course, important benefits. We wouldn't be on this call if we didn't all believe that there are important benefits to the return on investment here. And it's critical that we have to keep building that body of evidence that these elements of value are real. I'll just highlight a couple of places where in our report we try to pull out some specific medtech examples of value. Under expanded product indication, there was a nice example in 2018 where FDA cited a patient preference study in its clearance of an expanded indication for a home hemodialysis machine. Under informing regulatory decisions, again, we tend to operate more in the US context. At Faster Cures, FDA CDRH Center highlights on its website that 52% of authorizations included patient-reported outcomes in clinical studies as of 2024. We can argue about whether patient-reported outcomes are always patient-centered, but that's another conversation. And then finally, improved patient satisfaction and use of the product. We talk about in the report about how digital health developers in particular have a pretty unique opportunity to track use of and satisfaction with their tools, which is, I think, something drug developers are very envious of. So if you can go to the next slide. I'll just end by highlighting very quickly, in our view, there are a number of factors that are creating unique opportunities to encourage more regular and rigorous patient engagement activities in the medtech industry, and maybe more broadly. First is that evidence of the value of patient engagement exists. A lot of people on this call have been responsible for helping create that evidence. And a lot of it is not medtech specific, but it's very important to have and to collate. Second is that there are a lot of resources to inform patient engagement approaches that can be leveraged for medtech purposes. We're not starting from ground zero. The third is regulators' commitment to patient engagement remains high. In the US context, again, FDA's new user fee agreements, or the most recent user fee agreements, has a set of commitments that are really renewing and refreshing CDRH's focus on patient engagement. The fourth is that demand for and rigor around the use of real-world data is on the rise across the ecosystem, and patient experience data and patient-reported data are really key sources in that category. The next is the whole ecosystem is prioritizing diversity and inclusion in research. We hope that trend continues. Somebody asked a question in the chat about what EDI stood for. And in digital health in particular, there's some really nice tools and frameworks for more patient-centric products and more inclusive products. And then MedTech, interestingly to us, has a culture of rapid cycle innovation and user-centered design. These are traditional strengths of engineers and digital health product designers, which really creates an opportunity to link those approaches to a more patient-engaged approach across their whole total product lifecycle. And then finally, there is an appetite for change. We hear from MedTech trade associations that they are seeing increasing interest from their companies in building their capacity to engage patient communities more effectively. And there's also a lot of interest in patient-led innovation, which is something that digital health particularly lends itself well to. So I'm just going to stop there. That was a lot to skate over in a few minutes. We're going to continue to pursue this topic. Next year, we'll be working on a framework to better define and demonstrate the value of patient engagement in that medtech context specifically. So we're trying to tease apart the things that are really unique to medtech, as well as a toolkit to support more patient engagement by those companies. So we hope to get to work with some of you on those efforts going forward. Thanks very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Kristen. I think you've really put into perspective a unique perspective that we don't often hear from in terms of thinking about what's happening in the medtech space around patient engagement, and certainly the white paper that you reference. A lot of great information in there. I know it's been added to the chat as well too. I was glad to hear you reference as well that certainly as it relates to real world data and thinking about then the implications for digital health, where there are opportunities to further pursue patient engagement as it relates to those types of activities. Certainly that's an area for PFMD where we are looking at and currently have out right now an open consultation around patient engagement in digital health activities as well. So it's interesting to see the world sort of coming together as it relates to medtech, digital health. So thank you very much for that overview. And as I turn things over to Mark, I know, Mark, you and I have talked quite extensively recently as well about reflecting on where patient engagement has come from, particularly with some of the original roots in medtech. That, you know, from in a number of different ways that was actually where it started. However, things have progressed in a different way, and certainly as we tie the link as well, I think Kristen, you had mentioned in terms of innovation and thinking about certainly med tech, med device companies in that regards, but innovation is also very important to the investment community. And as we think about investors' sustainability, I'm really curious to hear from you, Mark, in terms of your perspectives around sustainability and patient engagement as well too. So I'll turn things over to you and you can lead us off in that direction.
Thank you, Haley. I appreciate it. And want to do a big shout out to Kristen. I've had the opportunity to work with her for quite some time, and the organization she's from, Faster Cures, has done tremendous work in patient engagement over quite a period of time. And to what Haley said, a lot of people don't realize this, but the original regulatory work in patient engagement came out of the device community. And the first guidance on patient engagement was in the device space. And they actually pioneered patient preference studies. All of that came from the device world. And again, Kristen and her team have been instrumental in shaping the policy in the US and on patient engagement. I was thinking about this before we got to this session earlier this morning, and I often say that I've been in this space for nearly 25 years. And I realized I've been saying that for about 5 years. And so I went back and did the math, and it's actually 30 years now. So a long time of working in the space of trying to elevate the voice of the patient in benefit risk originally, and then in what we now know is patient engagement, which is really a new profession. And so it's really exciting to see all of you here. One of the things that I think is really, really important for us to all understand, there are really three main levers to press the biopharmaceutical and device industry to really do good patient engagement. And we all know it's the right thing to do. I think many of us believe it creates a business imperative. In other words, it's good for the business. And there's data to show that. But the three drivers are the regulatory system. And we've seen FDA, EMA, and other regulatory bodies really step up and really create the regulatory environment to do patient engagement. Second is the investor community. And we're beginning to see a shift in the investor community where they're starting to look at really wanting to understand, is the product, whether it be a device or a medicine, going to address the outcomes that matter to patients? Are they going to be clinically developed in an efficient way that allows us to speed up the process and make it more user-friendly for people in those studies? Are those products actually going to land in a market where consumers are actually going to want them? So they're beginning to take an interest in that, and that interest allows them to drive their resources and their investments in a different way. Similarly, ESG, incredibly important. We can go to the next slide. ESG has been something that a number of us in the patient community have been focused on for about 10 years. It's relatively new, and it's really gained a lot of traction in the last decade. Now, I saw a lot of people asking, what is ESG? And you see here it's defined as the environment, social, and government criteria. It really has come up through a number of entities that have been setting standards for companies' behaviors. Now, I'll go into it in a minute, but it's also taken on renewed importance, in particular in Europe, where there's been recent legislation that is even driving more interest in this. And I can tell you, as somebody who was at Novartis and participated in the board level ESG committee, we have dozens and dozens of people solely dedicated to this. And we have hundreds of people working within the organization to generate the data to respond to these standards bodies. And there are a number of them. And they're all looking at these three things. And I'll start with governance, but it's really how well is the company doing at risk management, things like transparency, anti-bribery and corruption, looking at the environment, which is fairly straightforward in many respects, climate stability, resources, waste management, but also innovation. And that's a key one, especially in the industry we work at, because if we can innovate better, we can create environmental impacts. And certainly our medicines and our devices also create environmental impact. And then social, heavy focus on our workers' human rights, diversity, inequity, and inclusion, and other social issues. And it gives us an opportunity to think about how can we plug in patient engagement. And patient engagement can come in multiple ways, but it's an opportunity for us to put metrics into this through these standards bodies so that we're measuring this. Some of them include ensuring, again, are we getting at the right outcomes that matter so that we're going to produce products that can actually have an impact in society? Are we going to design our clinical development programs so that they're easier for patients to participate in and shorten our timelines? Huge opportunities to really integrate patient engagement and utilize a standards body that is having huge impacts on companies, including the biopharmaceutical and life science companies. We go to the next slide. You start to see where some of these opportunities become really real. companies that are doing good patient engagement have begun to realize that it's a business differentiator. It allows them to set themselves out apart from other companies. Now, we saw this in the rare disease community. We've seen it now for a couple of decades. Good patient engagement there means that you're going to develop a better people who need it quicker. And the opportunities are huge. And we're seeing that spread throughout the life science communities. You get the opportunity to really differentiate yourself in the market and drive this. You start to look at risk mitigation or going beyond risk mitigation and really developing the metrics that show what a company is doing to drive good patient engagement, how it can impact their innovation, how it can impact society. You also start to look at how this is setting our priorities and our business decisions. Huge opportunities, but when I start to think about some of the examples at Novartis, if you've ever worked in breast cancer, you'll know that you have people who are newly diagnosed, and you also know that there are people, mostly women, living with metastatic breast cancer. Very tough disease, and unfortunately, these people will ultimately die of their disease. There's a lot of medications. I can tell you, and this is typical in the oncology space, certainly in the metastatic breast cancer space, the primary endpoint we've all looked at is how do we extend lives? But when you speak with women, mostly, and men living with metastatic breast cancer, they'll tell you that, yeah, they want to live longer, but they also want to live better. And if they can't live better, they don't want to live longer. And as a result of really good patient engagement, I'm really excited and proud to say that researchers at Novartis are now, for the first time, looking at developing products with the primary endpoint being on improving quality of life, not extending it. That's a major transformation that came about because people living with metastatic breast cancer were saying, yeah, these medicines are great, I'm living longer, but I can't tolerate the medicines. And at some point, I just stopped taking them. And that's the end. Huge opportunities to de-risk your investment decision-making. Companies and investors are beginning to now evaluate potential products to see if they had good patient engagement. I'll give you a good example of a mistake that happened at Novartis, where we bought assets in schizophrenia that showed really good data that they would be highly effective and likely highly safe, had not gone into clinical development. We had to decide if we move into clinical development. And the patient engagement team flagged very quickly that there was a problem here. There was no patient engagement done when we purchased these assets. There was no assessment done at that time. And the primary endpoint was eliminating hallucinations. Sounds great. But if you've worked in that community, you know that the vast majority, about 80% of people living with schizophrenia, actually like their hallucinations. It's part of their identity, part of their personality. It's for those of us who are intensely healthy that project our own assumptions in, that just make the invalid mistake of thinking that people want to lose those hallucinations. It's simply not true. That means that these products, while likely to be safe and effective, are not going to have a market. Huge opportunities to de-risk our investment decision-making. And then driving better outcomes. Now, if you think of diseases like Sjogren's, where Novartis and other companies have been very heavily engaged in, we've been able to work with the community, work with patients, identify new endpoints, new measurement tools, and really identify outcomes that matter. And in working with the community, actually shorten the timeline for diagnosis and give an opportunity for people to have much better outcomes moving into the future. Huge opportunities when you start to think about how all of this can be integrated into ESG. If we go to the last slide I'm going to present on, it's really looking at measurement. And it's come up a few times in the comments. And I'm really proud to say that this was one of my priorities going to Novartis, is to create impact measurement. And the team put this together, and kudos to those that worked on this article, Beza, Faye, who you're going to hear from soon, Elizabeth and Eleanor, some really exciting patient advocate leaders, and Trudy all worked to put this together. But it really focuses in on not just counting activities, but taking that a whole number of steps further, where you really are clear on your inputs, how your structures and processes impact that. What are your outputs? What do you learn as you move forward? What actions do you take on those learnings? And recording all of that so that you can start to determine what are the outcomes and what are the impact. And we're doing this now with a focus on the patient, health systems, and the company. And I can tell you, and this goes back to the conversation earlier on value. Value means a lot of things to different people. And I really love the comment that Liz made about this being a framework for thinking and processing this information. One of the learnings we've had is that we can demonstrate that whenever we do good patient engagement early in research and carry it into clinical development, that we save as much as 3 months, or we shorten 3 months in the clinical development timeline. That creates a savings of over 200 million per asset. And we create an NPV of somewhere between 850 to 1.5 billion. Now, an NPV is a future indication of additional profit. Those are big numbers for a company like Novartis, for any company. And that value proposition has very, very different meanings to people in early research, mid-stage research, early clinical development, and commercialization. So really identifying and work on the value is critical, and how we frame that in all of our thinking so that we can really elevate this whole profession of patient engagement. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Haley. It's going to take us through the next steps. Haley?
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Mark. Really great to hear some very concrete examples to really bring to life a lot of the theory, but also the very practical value of patient engagement as well, whether it be from a business perspective and also very much related from an investor and a sustainability perspective. I just want to share a couple more slides, and then we will get into the breakouts to really hear from our audience, who have been very active in the chat, which I absolutely love. So I encourage you, please, to include your questions, your comments, your links, etc., to be able to, let's exchange and dialogue on the side here as well. So on the next slide, I wanted to share with you some work that was brand new. And that is looking at some mapping that we did about the integration of patient engagement into sustainability strategies. On the left-hand side, you'll see the QR code for last year's report. And on the right-hand side, we're really excited to launch this new report right now, today. You're the first ones that will have an opportunity to see this analysis. And what it demonstrates, if we look to the next slide in this year's report, is that when we looked at publicly available documents, reports, any externally facing documentation from the companies that you can see on the slide here, we were looking to see how patient engagement was included in a number of different ways. Was it included in their materiality matrices, which is another component of ESG, or the environmental, social, and governance? Was it included in their sustainability strategies, as a commitment? And what we can see is from year over year, that compared to last year, we are seeing substantially more companies, particularly pharmaceutical companies, that are integrating patient engagement into their sustainability strategies. So clearly, they are identifying the value of patient engagement, particularly as it relates to their strategies moving forward, and for some of them, the commitments that they are making as well, too. So I encourage you to certainly take a look at the most recent paper. There is an analysis comparing to last year as well, too. The next slide, what I want to share with you related to this, is through the task force that we have related to investors, sustainability, and impact. We've been working very closely with the collaborators to identify the types of metrics, patient engagement metrics, that could be included into sustainability strategies. You'll see on the screen that they've been divided into 6 key themes, and you can find the metrics themselves specifically on the metrics selector, which again, if you follow the QR code, and I believe my colleagues are also putting it into the chat as well too, where you can identify and go through more specifically those types of metrics, again, that are very much related to ESG and sustainability. This is like a menu of metrics that a company could select and choose from to help build that into their sustainability strategies. Ideally, what we are aiming to do is eventually be able to pull those down and really narrow in a smaller number of metrics that could be incorporated into a much more formalized, structured framework that would be used then to compare ESGs across companies. There are many organizations that do that, and we're looking at the due process to be able to go through and ultimately have a couple of the metrics incorporated into a much more formalized framework as well. With that in mind, then, we've talked a lot about pharma, we've talked a lot about med tech, we've talked about investors and sustainability. I'd like to give the final word today to Faye Weston, and to be able to provide the perspective from the patient community. And certainly the work that you're doing, Faye, ties in a lot with the conversation that we're having. So I'll turn it over to you, Faye.
Thank you, Hayley. I'm delighted to be here today, and I'd really like to pick up on a few points that have been raised, but I'm going to start with, I'm a lifelong patient. I have an autoimmune disease. You wouldn't know it to see me, but I also work in pharma. So I get to see all different elements. And in some point in my past, I worked in investor relations for pharma as well as the science. So when I look at it from my perspective as a patient and other patients I interact with, the biggest thing we want is access to medicines. And when I look at my disease state 45 years ago, it was fairly brutal. I have watched technology move so far, and that has happened, and I cannot express how much that has improved my personal quality of life. And that's been because I've been given access to it for something that was designed with me in mind, and many people like me, and this costs a lot of money. Innovation is not cheap. And really, what patients want is something that suits them. As someone commented in the chat, you don't want to extend your life if it's going to be utterly miserable for another 18 months. Your ability to be yourself is so valuable, and it's not really something you can put a quantitative measure on. I could live another 20 years, but what are those 20 years going to be like? So when we look at all the stakeholders involved, there are many of them. We have researchers, whether they be in academic centres or pharma. And you've then got the investment community. Now, the investment community, as we think of stocks and shares, are one part of that, but there's also the governments. How much does government put into healthcare? That's normally related to GDP. Product development and innovation cost so much money. We need the support from investment, and we're now starting to see investors getting really interested in that. It's almost a full circle when you've got the research, the products that's informed by patients. You know, you can bring time down, particularly drug development. On average, would you believe, takes 10 to 15 years and can cost anywhere from 45 million to 4.5 billion per product. And the whole point of that is patient engagement reduces that time. Time is money in drug development. The fact you've delayed a clinical trial because you couldn't recruit patients because you made it so difficult for them to participate, or you developed a drug that, well, as Mark said earlier, people really don't particularly want. What a waste of time and money. That, you need to have patience right from the beginning when you start developing a drug. you need to think about, well, what's my end goal? What is this going to bring to the people I'm trying to serve? So when you pull it all together, the interrelationships between our stakeholders of research, whether it's academic or commercial, investors, whether it's private stock market or the government, and then all of that goes into the health systems. And right in the middle of all of this, you've got patients. You know, I'm a patient, I invest, I'm very attached to the health system, although I'm its biggest critic on occasions. All of these aspects relate to each other. And you've got to try and fix a bit of them all. And the common thread is the patient. You wouldn't, nobody's going to design a product that doesn't work for anyone. Yet we've been doing that for an awful long time. So I think really that's my view on it. And if you don't talk to patients, you're not going to understand what they want. You're not going to understand what is the value add to your product. And for so many people, it can be absolutely life-changing. I'm one of those people. I'm a type 1 diabetic. And all I can say is, let's keep measuring. Let's get better at this. Let's get more money in for new innovation. We have the greatest minds across the globe to do this. But don't forget the people who use it. So short and sweet. I hope that was too short, but fire any questions because I know we're running over time.
Thank you so much, Faye. It's terrific to have your perspective and really appreciate hearing from the patient, as you said, and it's such an important perspective to, if not the most important perspective, to be able to share on this discussion today and the value in terms of what patient engagement brings. So thank you for sharing that. In the interest of time, I'm going to suggest that we move on here because I think, as we've identified with the chat, that there's lots of conversation, there's lots of chatter going on, and I'd really like to get out into our breakout rooms. And so with that in mind, you can see on this next slide here that this is what we aim to do in the next 20-25 minutes or so as we go through. So this is the opportunity for all of you to contribute in terms of where do you see the value of patient engagement? When we go into the breakout rooms, there will be a facilitator, meaning one of our panelists today, which I thank all of you for that. And there will also be a team from PFMD to help support in terms of setting up the various different tools that we'll be using today. The idea here is really to be able to share your perspective, share your thoughts, and help to build on the work of what Liz had shared previously. And really, let's think about how we can add some clarity and some structure to the value of patient engagement. So with that, I would ask my colleague Matt to help divide us in the wave his magic wand in terms of going through to the breakout rooms. You'll see here, oh, it's disappeared, but we'll pull it into the breakouts as we move forward. So we'll see you on the other side in the breakout rooms. And welcome back. I think we, through the magic of technology, we were whisked away in mid-sentence, unfortunately, from our group. So Robert, I encourage you to add your comment in the chat, which would be wonderful. And recognizing that this discussion has been incredibly insightful, we were hoping to have a moment for our facilitators to share back some of the key reflections. What I might ask each of you to do, Mark, Liz, Faye, Kristen, is perhaps just write a sentence or two in the chat, because there's just one or two more quick slides that we want to go through, but I'm conscious of the time as well too. So thank you to all of you for your contributions, for speaking up, certainly about what we've been discussing today. And the group map will remain open until the end of the week. So if you would like to add additional comments in, you're more than welcome to. You can also switch between the group maps and see what others have identified there. very quickly then, just to let you know that I think this has sparked a lot of interest from any number of you. If you're interested in learning more about the work that we do at PFMD, specifically around the sustainability and patient engagement integration, or around the metrics that we're doing, please don't hesitate to reach out. Would really love to hear from you. I think any number of you have contributed some fantastic ideas. As well, equally so, I know Liz and Fatima would certainly be very keen to hear from you as well, if you're interested in learning more about the value triangles too. So please reach out. We'd also ask for your input very quickly one more time to let us know how you found this session. Is it a discussion? Is it an opportunity that you would recommend to some of your colleagues or friends in terms of listening to this session and the insights that you gained from it? So Matt, I would quickly ask you to just pop up the Zoom poll. And so just a question for each of you to answer from a scale of 1 to 10. How likely are you to suggest this session to a friend or colleague? 1 is not likely, and 10 is extremely likely. So 10 is that you found it very valuable, really enjoyed the discussion, and would really appreciate sharing this as well too. So with that, then, while you're completing the Zoom poll, again, I'll just move quickly through the slides. If we can move on to the next one, that would be great. And so certainly, as I mentioned at the beginning of the session, this was the last Patient Engagement Open Forum, the virtual one for 2024. It's been an exceptional year of any number of virtual sessions. If you'd like to follow up and learn more about these sessions, please follow us on the Synapse platform, where you can learn all more about the different sessions that are coming up. And we look forward to engaging with each of you following the session, and certainly please reach out. And thank you all very much for your contributions. A huge thank you to our contributors, to our facilitators, to the panelists, obviously, for the expertise and the opinions that you shared with the group as well too. So thanks everybody, wishing you a wonderful morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you may be. And we'll look forward to staying in touch. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Really appreciate everyone's contribution.
Thank you, and bye-bye.
Bye, Carol.
See you again very soon, I hope.
I'm sure.
Bye all.
Cheers, Robert.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Robert.
Absolute pleasure. Great session.
Terrific. Glad to hear it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Marina.